Hi spooky friends, welcome back to Kelly Does Stuff. Today we are going to make a rotten apple booth accessory, like a smallish thingy, for the witch section of our Halloween display, or you could put this anywhere, in any section. You don't have to theme your sections. You can do anything you want with your display. And it could be poison apples, it could be candied apples, caramel apples. Do you guys say caramel or caramel? You can do this any way you want. My booth is gonna have combination of a couple different types of apples. Now, you know that I have been working on a, here we go, witch tree for my display. And I do have a lot of Limax and Department 56 accessories that I'm putting in that display. But I'm always kind of thinking of different ideas and what else does it need? And I have not seen, it could very well exist, but I have not seen a rotten apple booth by Limax or Department 56. And I really love creating things. So I was like, well, let me try to make this accessory, because there are definitely a lot of types of accessories that Limax and Department 56 make that there is no way in this world I could attempt a version of that. So when I can make some kind of accessory, even if one sort of maybe also kind of exists, I like to go for it. Because then I could save maybe a little bit of money and then apply that towards the accessories that there's absolutely no way I can duplicate. So let's go ahead and get into it. Let's create a rotten apple booth.
Okay, this is the size we're going to be working with. I'm going to cut out 4 pieces of cardboard and then we're going to glue them together to make a box. I have a harder time working in a smaller scale, so you might want to adjust these sizes if you find this is a little bit big and doesn't work with the other accessories that you have in your display. Once you've got your box, you're going to hot glue that to another piece of cardboard. When the glue is completely dry, use a blade to cut away the excess cardboard. Next, I'm going to use some XPS foam to create some planks of wood. And to get this foam as thin as I want, I did break out my hot wire table. If you don't have this tool, you could create your planks of wood with your cardboard, or you could use some popsicle sticks. And the texturing technique that I'm going to use on the XPS foam here is the same thing that you would apply to those popsicle sticks. And I'm using this cutting mat here as a guide for the size of my planks of wood, but I don't really care if they're perfectly straight or exactly the same size, because this is going to be a rotten apple booth, a poison apple booth, somewhere in the witchy woods. So if it doesn't look perfect, that's better. That's actually more what I'm going for. Now we're going to use the blade to add some texture to our foam to transform it into planks of wood. Next, it's time to attach our planks of wood to our cardboard. And you'll see here that my planks are longer than the sides of the box. And that is just easier than worrying about all of the corners matching up exactly, making sure that every piece of wood was the right exact size. Once the hot glue is dry, I'll just flip the box over and then cut off any of the excess. And then if you want to, you can add some more texture and rough up the ends of your wood planks. Now we're going to cut 4 more pieces of styrofoam, but we're going to make it a little bit wider than our planks of wood. And this is going to go on the top part of our box to create kind of a counter, like where somebody would go up and order their apples. Once you've textured your styrofoam, you're going to hot glue them to the top of your box, and you can see here that I'm having them hang over the edges of the box. And you can see here, this is my fancy way of measuring what size this plank on the side needs to be. And then again, if you need to trim it, just flip it over. Next, we're going to move on to making the witch's hat, and this is going to be the top of the accessory. I have made witch's hats a couple different ways. This time I decided to try cardboard. So I'm cutting out a circle, and then I'm going to cut a slit in the middle. I want to bend that cardboard a bit and just make it a little bit easier to work with, because we want to curl it into a cone shape. We're going to use hot glue to secure the shape of the pointy part of our hat, and then we're going to hot glue the pointy part to the brim of the hat, which is another piece of cardboard. I'm going to roll out some air dry clay to cover our hat and begin to shape it. When I get to the part of the clay where it's going to fold over on itself, I'm just going to use an X-Acto knife to cut out a little bit of a section and then smooth that seam together. I'm going to go pretty simple for my hat, but you could go crazy, have lots of fun adding details and wrinkles and whatever else you might be able to think of. And now I'm just working on the pointy part, getting another piece of clay, rolling it into a really rough looking cone shape, and then adding it to the top of the hat, and then just kind of playing around with it to get the point and the curve and the shape that I want. Once I've got my basic shape, I want to start smoothing things out, and a wet paper towel is really going to be your friend here. It will allow you to get rid of the seams, that area where the cone on the top met the rest of the hat. You can smooth that out so it doesn't look like it has a big bump there. Any other areas that have some lines or details that you don't want, you can wet your fingers and wet the clay. If you've got clay tools, break those out or just use your finger. I'm smoothing out the rim of my hat here down on the cardboard, and I want my clay to extend a little bit beyond my cardboard. So once I've got it to the smoothness that I want, I'm just gonna start cutting away any excess with an X-Acto knife. I did break out this tool to help me create some folds in the hat. You could also use a dowel or the end of a paintbrush, and while that clay is drying, I will prop up those folds on the end of a paintbrush to help it keep its shape. I decided I did want my witch's hat to have a buckle, so I'm going to cut out a band here, and I don't do that straight at all, but it's no problem because we'll just use a wet paper towel to smooth out one of those lines and try again. I kind of felt like I ended up with a band that was a little bit wider than what I was going for, but it's fine, we're just gonna go with it. I add some water to the hat and the band to help secure those two pieces together. And for the buckle, it's just a square of clay and then a smaller square on top. Since we have to wait about a day for that clay to dry before we can paint it, we're going to move on to painting the base of our accessory. And I'm going to start with a black acrylic paint. When that is completely dry, I'm going to add dark brown paint, and I'm going to do a pretty thorough coating, but I'm not going to press into the deep scratches and divots. I want those to stay black. So we're kind of doing a dry brushing technique here, but we have a lot more paint on our brush than we will when we begin to add lighter shades of paint as we continue to detail this base. You can see that I'm going in with my next lightest shade here. I'm putting less paint on the brush and I'm rubbing a lot of it off before I add it to my base. You want to make sure that each layer of paint is completely dry before you go in with your lighter shade, or you'll just kind of blend those colors together, which can definitely be an interesting look. You could probably get some really good mid-tone colors. Just make sure that that's the look that you're going for. And if you end up putting too much of that lighter shade, instead of just hitting those highlight areas, you get like a big swipe of a light color that you don't want, just paint over that in one of your darker colors, let it completely dry, and try again. I want to show you my brush here. For my lightest shades, and really overall when I'm doing dry brushing, I like to use older brushes where the bristles are really rough and spread out. When you have a new brush, you know how those bristles are kind of all together in like a nice little row in line? That will kind of cause things to streak a little bit more. You'll kind of get lines and smooth application of the paint. With the rough bristles, your paint is kind of spread out a little bit more. You're just doing the lightest amount of paint on your brush, and that will really allow you to better hit those areas that you just want to highlight. Now that our clay is dry, we're gonna go back to our hat, and I'm going to paint it with this multi-purpose paint, and it has a satin finish to it. I'm also painting the underside of the hat black. This purple is a little bit streaky, so I do apply 2 coats, letting it dry in between coats. And I'm going with a silver gray for my buckle, and then you can see there that I accidentally painted the center there black when it should be purple, so I had to go in and fix that. Once the hat was completely dry, I set it on top of the base so that way I could figure out where the dowels that are going to connect the 2 pieces are going to go. I'm going to use 4 dowels and put them at the corners. I'm going to paint them before I attach them. I'm going to use that same black paint that I did for the hat. When those completely dry, I'm just going to add some hot glue to the end of my dowel and attach it to the base. Okay, the camera's not lined up well as I'm attaching the hat, but you're gonna see me attach this hat a couple more times because later I end up dropping this whole thing on the ground and have to redo this. I made a couple of simple signs that I printed on copy paper, and I'm going to attach them to some XPS foam with Mod Podge. First sign I'm going to work on has the apple flavors, and I'm going to attach this to some XPS foam that is a little bit bigger than the size of the sign, so it kind of creates a border around the sign. And I'm just doing some quick texturing to make this look a little bit like wood. You're not gonna see a lot of this, the sign's gonna cover up most of it. So I'm just gonna go in with that blade again and paint it a little bit, then we'll Mod Podge the sign, and then we'll hot glue that sign to the front of the base. I apply the Mod Podge to the back of the paper, and then once I set it on top of the styrofoam here, I'm going to go over the whole thing with Mod Podge. I feel like this just kind of helps it be extra secure and in place. The Mod Podge does dry clear, and this one has a gloss to it, so it's going to give it a little bit of a sheen, and I do that over the whole thing, even the styrofoam part. For the other signs, I'm going to paint just the sides and the back of the styrofoam. One of the signs I'm going to place on the counter part of the base, so I'm creating this little stand for the back that I'm just going to hot glue at an angle to that sign, and then I'll hot glue the entire sign onto the base of the accessory. As I attach the sign here, you can see that that hat is back in place, but I had to take it off again because I realized I didn't cut away that excess cardboard from where I made those folds in the hat. So I'm just going to use an X-Acto knife to do that, and then that kind of exposed a little bit of the clay from underneath the hat, so I painted that black and then painted that cardboard from where I kept hot gluing and unattaching the hat to those dowels. Speaking of the hat, I felt like this stand needed a name. So once again, I printed out a sign. I'm going to Mod Podge it to a very thin piece of the XPS foam. And since it's so thin, I'm gonna just be able to cut it out with a scissor. And what I did there was just paint the back of the sign red. You're not really gonna see it, but just in case somebody's checking out your display and they're sort of peeking around the side, they'll see that the back of the apple is also red. And I hot glued that to the front of the witch's hat, and then finally hot glued the witch's hat back in place. Of course, our apple stand needs some apples. I got this Ashland miniature at Michael's and it was 40% off. Now, those look a little too nice for rotten apples and poison apples and bad apples, so I'm going to paint them. I found that multi-surface paint went on a little bit easier, but I did use acrylic, just plain acrylic for some of the colors. I'm going with different greens, yellows, I did some brown, I did some different color reds, and I'm just really kind of experimenting with different looks. I purchased more apples on Amazon, as well as this little basket in the dollhouse section at Michael's. I'm gonna fill the basket with some coconut fiber. Then I'm going to hot glue those apples into the basket. But of course, I have to go in again and paint a whole bunch of miniature apples. And kudos to everybody who paints miniatures and works in small scales. This is quite the challenge for me. I accidentally bought 3 of these Limax accessories, so good job me on saving money on this project. My idea was that I would be able to pull the witch loose from the base. You can kind of do that sometimes with Limax things, but she was not budging. However, this little free sample sign was, so I hot glued that to my booth, and then I'm just going to take this witch just as she is and stick her inside the booth. Unfortunately, she wasn't quite tall enough, so I had to give her a boost with some styrofoam. And nope, I'm not even going to paint that styrofoam at all. And if someone looks at your display and says, I can see styrofoam unpainted in there, you know what you say? You just tell them, don't look at it. And then I'm going to hot glue our basket of apples to the booth. We are almost finished with our accessory, but we need to talk about light. So let's rewind a little bit to what I am doing here. I'm using a screwdriver to just put some holes into the base of my display on all 4 sides. Because what I'm gonna do for lights is just take some fairy lights and stick them inside the base. That's it, that simple. It is not going to give off a ton of light. So I'm gonna show you a couple different options if you would like better lighting for your accessory. You could also use these battery operated spotlights. These are by Limax, this color is purple, and you would just shine it onto your apple booth. You could also use a light like this by Limax. They come in a couple different colors. You do need an adapter. It doesn't come with the adapter that you're gonna plug into the bottom of the light. Now, you do probably wanna think about what type of light you might want before you actually begin building your apple stand. I knew I was gonna stick those fairy lights inside, but if I was going to use this type of light, I would have cut a hole in the base. So at the very beginning, when I was cutting out my cardboard, I would have determined the size of the hole that I would have needed on the back cardboard panel so that light could sit inside there. It's very similar to how Limax and Department 56 have the light cords go into their buildings. And you'd still want to add the hole so the light could shine through. And then lastly is having your light shine down from the hat. So again, you want to go back to the beginning when you're building your hat and cut out a hole to the shape of this light, so that way you could hide your light, kind of tuck it up into that hole. Or if you actually don't care that you can see the light itself, you could just hot glue the light to the underside of the hat, like right now in this stage if you want to. This light does come with a remote, which is nice, and some different options for colors. And that's it, spooky friends. We have a rotten apple booth. Let's create a little scene just to get an idea of what this might look like in our displays. Thank you all so much for watching. I just love sharing these videos with you. I hope that you found a few things that could be helpful for your own projects. Let me know if you decide to make a rotten apple booth. And I would love it so very much if you would give this video a like, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. Blah, blah, blah. So, I don't know.